For centuries, humanity has gazed upon the moon, a pale guardian hanging in the night sky. We wrote poems for it, navigated oceans by its light, and one day we even set foot upon its dusty plains. But what if, hidden beneath its silent craters, something far older had always been there? Not just stones and shadows, but a civilization, quiet, calculating, and strangely similar to us in its needs: survival, shelter, sustenance. This is not a tale of little green men waving from the stars. This is a study, a reconstruction of what life would demand if intelligent beings thrived on the moon. How would they eat when no plant grows under its harsh sunlight? How would they breathe in a world without air? What would home mean in a place with no seasons, no rain, no oceans, only night that lasts 14 Earth days and a day that burns with deadly radiation? To survive here, they would need to become architects of extremes. Imagine domes grown from molten regolith, not built by hands, but shaped by chemical reactions. Homes buried beneath layers of rock to shield from solar storms. Water mined from ancient ice locked in craters forever cloaked in darkness. A treasure more valuable than gold. Their kitchens would not smell of firewood or spices, but hum with bioreactors, turning minerals and trace gases into protein-rich gels, their version of bread. Clothing? Not fabric, but skin shield. Adaptive, semi-living membranes designed to trap warmth during the frozen nights and reflect lethal rays during the blazing days. Society? Perhaps scattered colonies connected by tunnels like veins beneath the dust, where each city is no bigger than a human stadium, but self-sufficient, efficient, and endlessly watchful. And their culture? It would not rise with the sun, for the sun is a threat here. It would rise with shadows. They would celebrate the long night, 2 Earth weeks of calm and repair, and endure the long day, hiding from the rage of the star that powers our life, but threatens theirs. Trade would be rare, conflict even rarer, for every resource is scarce and every being is precious. Survival on the moon begins with one element: water. Without it, there is no life. The first settlers, or perhaps the first natives, would discover it not in flowing rivers, but as frozen ghosts, hidden in craters where sunlight never touches. Mining these deposits would be a ritual of life itself. Entire clans may form around a single reservoir, guarding it like a sacred flame. Their technology? Sonic drills that crack the ice silently to avoid disturbing the fragile vacuum around them. Food follows water. With no soil, no photosynthesis, their diet would never resemble ours. Instead, they might cultivate microbial mats within pressurized caverns, fed by chemical energy drawn from lunar minerals and sparse solar input. These mats could be dried, shaped, fermented, even sculpted into textures that imitate meat or bread. Each meal would be small, dense, and shared communally, for in scarcity lies their sense of unity. Shelter is their city. Unlike our sprawling skylines, theirs would sink inward, a civilization turned underground. Layers of basalt shield them from radiation. Tunnels branch like neural pathways, each leading to chambers where families huddle not for privacy, but for survival warmth. Light here is artificial, soft bioluminescent panels mimicking starlight, never the harsh glare of the sun. And how do they breathe? The moon gives no air freely. Oxygen must be stripped from rocks, a slow, energy-draining process, but a steady one. Their atmosphere would be thin, slightly metallic in taste, carrying the faint scent of the minerals that birthed it. To walk outside is a rare ritual, done only by the skilled, their astronauts, clothed in the living suits of their making. On Earth,
Air is invisible, taken for granted, a soft ocean of oxygen and nitrogen that kisses our skin every second. But on the moon, air is a treasure. There are no trees to exhale it, no oceans to store it, no breeze to carry it. For an alien civilization born here, the very idea of breathing would shape their identity. Entire traditions might emerge around the concept of the first breath, a sacred moment when a newborn inhales processed oxygen for the first time, not from the sky, but from the labor of their ancestors. How would they create this breath? The moon is rich in oxides, rocks that lock oxygen within their chemical bonds. By heating regolith to extreme temperatures or using electric currents to break those bonds, oxygen can be released. The byproduct? Metals like iron, titanium, and silicon, perfect for tools and construction. Thus, air and architecture would be siblings here, born from the same stone. Imagine towering breath towers buried underground, where heat exchanges glow faintly blue as they free air from dust. Their air would not feel like ours. It would be slightly thin, perhaps flavored with trace elements like sulfur or sodium, a metallic tang that every alien child would grow up tasting on their tongue. And because air is costly, waste would be taboo. Every exhale recycled, every leak considered a tragedy. Doors would not swing open, but seal like arteries. Their greetings may not involve words at first, but the sharing of a controlled breath, a symbolic act of life. Ventilation would shape their architecture, narrow corridors to minimize volume, clustered living spaces to conserve warmth, and a rhythm of life tied not to sunrise, but to the cycle of oxygen harvesting. When Earth's humans think of survival, they think of food and water. On the moon, survival begins with a whisper, the whisper of breath.
On Earth, air is invisible, taken for granted, a soft ocean of oxygen and nitrogen that kisses our skin every second. But on the moon, air is a treasure. There are no trees to exhale it, no oceans to store it, no breeze to carry it. For an alien civilization born here, the very idea of breathing would shape their identity. Entire traditions might emerge around the concept of the first breath, a sacred moment when a newborn inhales processed oxygen for the first time, not from the sky, but from the labor of their ancestors. How would they create this breath? The moon is rich in oxides, rocks that lock oxygen within their chemical bonds. By heating regolith to extreme temperatures or using electric currents to break those bonds, oxygen can be released. The byproduct? Metals like iron, titanium, and silicon, perfect for tools and construction. Thus, air and architecture would be siblings here, born from the same stone. Imagine towering breath towers buried underground, where heat exchangers glow faintly blue as they free air from dust. Their air would not feel like ours. It would be slightly thin, perhaps flavored with trace elements like sulfur or sodium, a metallic tang that every alien child would grow up tasting on their tongue. And because air is costly, waste would be taboo. Every exhale recycled, every leak considered a tragedy. Doors would not swing open, but seal like arteries. Their greetings may not involve words at first, but the sharing of a controlled breath, a symbolic act of life. Ventilation would shape their architecture, narrow corridors to minimize volume, clustered living spaces to conserve warmth, and a rhythm of life tied not to sunrise, but to the cycle of oxygen harvesting. When Earth's humans think of survival, they think of food and water. On the moon, survival begins with a whisper, the whisper of breath. On Earth, we build toward the sky. On the moon, they would build into the ground. Their homes would resemble hives, layered beneath the surface to shield from radiation and meteor strikes. The entrance would be narrow, almost invisible, camouflaged by regolith drifts. Inside, the cities would glow softly with bioluminescent corridors. Rooms would not be square, straight lines waste pressure. Instead, domed chambers and arched tunnels would curve like the inside of bones, each supporting the next. Walls might be grown, not built, self-healing composites made from lunar dust and engineered organisms, hardening over time like coral reefs. Furniture, if we can call it that, would be minimal. Space is not for possession, it is for function. Sleeping chambers stacked like pods, communal halls for meals and oxygen rituals, narrow thermal shafts where heat from the reactors flows upward to warm entire sectors. Privacy would be rare, connection constant, and above it all, silence. The surface would remain bare, a camouflage against the sky. Only faint patterns of movement in the dust would betray the presence of a civilization hidden just beneath your feet.
Society on the moon could not afford chaos. Here, survival was the only currency, and every decision echoed through the colony like a pulse of air. Laws were not written on paper, they were etched into the very flow of life. Each being knew from birth that waste was a crime, excess was a sin, and cooperation was sacred. The first lesson a lunar child learned was not how to speak, but how to conserve. A breath saved, a droplet spared, a watt of heat redirected. Leadership was not about power, it was about balance. Those who led were chosen not for ambition, but for their ability to calculate survival in every heartbeat. Unlike Earth, where politics was often a theater of noise and promises, the lunar civilization thrived in silence. Councils were formed in deep chambers, where light glowed like liquid silver on the walls. Decisions were made through resonance, pulses of energy sent through the floors, felt by all who attended. These pulses carried meaning, agreement, dissent, urgency. There was no shouting, no riots, no slogans. Leadership rotated like the phases of their eternal satellite, ensuring no one held control for long enough to become corrupt. The concept of nation did not exist here, only clusters of survival, bound by shared breath. Every law stemmed from a single principle: conservation. Oxygen, water, heat, these were the currencies of justice. Theft of air was the highest crime, far worse than violence. Leaks were investigated like murders. A malfunctioning door could lead to exile. But punishment, too, was precise. They did not waste lives, they reallocated them. A criminal might become an outside worker, tasked to repair or harvest where survival was more dangerous. Rehabilitation was a return to balance, not revenge. In a world without paper or permanent ink, history was kept alive through living archives. Elders carried memory like a genetic code, passing it through shared dreams or neural recordings. They believed forgetting the past meant endangering the future. Earth's nations often rewrote history for politics. The moon could not afford such luxury. Every mistake had cost air, lives, warmth. And so every story, every miscalculation was recited until it became law. Freedom, as humans understood it, was a dangerous concept here. Freedom to consume, freedom to expand, freedom to destroy. These were luxuries of a world rich in resources. On the moon, freedom was redefined. It was the freedom to live without fear of the next collapse, the freedom to know your children would breathe tomorrow. Some outsiders, like the first human explorers, would see this as control, even tyranny.
But to the lunar dwellers it was peace. The silence of their society was not oppression. It was survival.
The moon was no friend to bare skin. Its surface swung between brutal extremes, blistering sunlight that could sear metal and cold so deep it could shatter stone. To survive, the lunar beings had learned long ago that clothing was not fashion. It was existence. Every layer was a membrane, every stitch a barrier between life and vacuum. Their garments were alive in their own way, not stitched by hands alone, but grown from fibers extracted from lunar minerals and engineered microorganisms. Each outfit was a second skin, breathing with its wearer, regulating temperature, storing heat like a heartbeat waiting to release. Unlike Earth, where looms and factories roared with the creation of cloth, lunar attire began in silent caves where special crystals grew, absorbing sunlight and cosmic radiation. These crystals were harvested and fed into biofabrication pods. Within days, they transformed into strands that gleamed like frozen silver threads. These threads were woven not by machines, but by guided energy pulses, forming patterns that aligned with each citizen's body rhythm. Each garment carried a signature, a pattern unique as a fingerprint, ensuring that no piece of clothing was ever truly duplicated. Each suit or robe served multiple roles: thermal regulation, radiation shielding, air filtration, and even subtle communication. Layers would shimmer faintly when their energy reserves were full, darken as warning when the body lost heat. A sleeve could store a day's worth of oxygen if the habitat failed. A collar could flare to signal distress. To outsiders, they might appear as elegant or ceremonial outfits, but to their wearers, they were as vital as lungs. In the deep halls beneath the crust of the moon, festivals were rare but profound. Clothing turned from function to art. Leaders wore garments that radiated faint light like captured starlight. Engineers wore darker, textured suits marked with utility flaps and tool ports. The caretakers of air wore garments with flowing edges, representing currents of breath. No dyes existed. Color came from the minerals used, the exposure to cosmic rays, the way each garment refracted the little light it received. Humans, when they first saw these living garments, mistook them for luxury. They whispered about alien fashion, about market value and design. But on the moon, vanity was a forgotten concept. There was no room for wasteful fabric, no space for excessive layers, no appetite for changing clothes with moods. Each piece was worn until it bonded with its owner, and only when a wearer passed on did their clothing dissolve into raw fibers, ready to be reborn. In this cycle, they found respect for the moon, for their resources, for their dead.
Sound, as humans know it, cannot travel in the vacuum of space. On the moon, silence is not just an absence, it is the default state of existence. For the lunar beings, this silence became the foundation of their communication. Long before humans arrived, they had mastered ways of exchanging thoughts without words. Their voices were not carried by air, but vibration, light, and subtle magnetic waves that resonated through their bodies and their habitats. Where earthlings spoke and shouted, they shimmered and pulsed. The primary mode of their dialogue was luminous, threads of bioluminescent patterns that traced across their skin-like garments or the delicate membranes of their faces. Each pulse, each flicker of light had meaning: a greeting, a warning, a question. Colors were crucial. A deep indigo meant sorrow or caution, while soft amber signaled comfort. To human eyes, it looked like an ever-shifting constellation, as if stars themselves were whispering. Close interaction required touch. By placing their hands upon one another or upon the walls of their tunnels, they sent low-frequency vibrations, coded signals that traveled through solid rock far better than sound ever could. This method was ancient
and considered intimate, used for deep conversations, the transfer of memory, or the teaching of sacred knowledge. To be touched in this way was to be trusted, because their memories were not just spoken, they were shared. When distance grew vast between colonies or during surface expeditions, they turned to their crystal towers, needle-like structures that protruded from craters, harnessing solar and cosmic radiation. These towers transmitted encoded light patterns that bounced across the moon's horizon, invisible to the naked human eye. Messages could cross hundreds of kilometers almost instantly without a single sound. The first time Earth's astronauts encountered these signals, they mistook them for natural reflections or perhaps interference from their own equipment. They couldn't conceive that silence could hold so much meaning. Later, when attempts were made to speak with the beings, humans used radios and speakers. The aliens only observed quietly, their skin flickering in bemused patterns, as if trying to understand why humans would try to shout into a void that had no ears.
On Earth, religion often arises from abundance, the cycles of rain, the gifts of harvest, the warmth of the sun. But on the moon, faith was born from scarcity. The beings who lived there learned to revere what was rare: air, warmth, and the fragile shimmer of life itself. Their religion was not about gods seated on thrones. It was about forces unseen yet always felt. Dust, for them, was sacred, the powdery regolith that cradled their homes, buried their dead, and stored the memory of ancient travelers. Temples were not towering structures. They were depressions in the surface, craters lined with reflective crystals, designed to catch the faint glow of earthlight. Pilgrims would gather on rare cycles, forming patterns along the crater floor that mimicked constellations they believed carried messages from their ancestors. The earth hung above them like a watchful eye, and in their oldest prayers they whispered through light, "The sky below remembers." Their faith revolved around three elements: breath, heat, and dust. Breath was the giver of continuity. It moved from one being to another through carefully balanced systems, so no breath was ever truly lost. Heat was the protector. They believed each individual carried a fragment of the sun. And dust was the archive of the moon, every grain a silent recorder of eons past. To step upon it carelessly was considered a sin, akin to erasing the scripture of their world. Long before human footprints scarred the surface, they had myths of beings from the sky. These sky people were neither enemies nor saviors, but distant relatives, those who left when the moon still shared a pulse with Earth. Some myths spoke of betrayal, that the sky people abandoned them to survive alone in the dark. Others spoke of a promised reunion when the cycles of shadow and light would align, and they would share breath once more. Unlike on Earth, where faith and science often stand apart, their religion was inseparable from survival. Rituals doubled as maintenance tasks. Festivals involved cleaning air ducts. Ceremonies meant calibrating crystal light towers. Prayers were recited as they sealed oxygen chambers. It was not superstition. It was memory encoded as reverence. Humans, upon discovering this, debated whether it was religion at all, or simply a perfect disguise for ancient engineering.
It began with a routine mission. At least, that's how the history books on Earth recorded it. A crew of 6, sent not to conquer, but to observe, descended in a silver capsule toward a crater no satellite had fully mapped. The landing was harsh. Dust rose like an ancient veil, obscuring the stars. What they didn't know was that beneath that crater lay one of the moon's oldest living settlements, and the beings below had been watching them long before they arrived.
The initial contact was not dramatic. There was no sudden light, no screeching alarms, just a flicker, a pale blue shimmer moving across the shadowed ridge, then vanishing. Commander Harris dismissed it as equipment reflection, but the youngest astronaut, Vega, whispered in the comms, "Something's moving out there." The lunar beings, cloaked in light-sensitive garments, had chosen to reveal only a silhouette, letting their presence ripple without threat. That night, as the crew set up their instruments, a series of faint pulses danced along the horizon. The humans mistook it for distant solar interference, until the pulses began to mimic the blinking rhythm of their habitat lights. It was deliberate. It was the first attempt at a bridge between two worlds, a Morse code made of stars. The crew debated. The United States Command urged caution. Observe, record, but do not engage. Yet the weight of history pressed upon them. To return home saying, "We saw them and did nothing," was unthinkable. Fear and wonder tangled like twin shadows on the crater floor. In the end, it was Vega who stepped out alone, helmet lights dimmed, arms wide open, a gesture they had studied in countless cultural archives. The first true meeting lasted only a minute. A figure emerged, taller than expected, its surface glinting with crystalline threads, neither entirely flesh nor machine. It raised an arm, and light rippled across its form like flowing water. Vega placed her gloved hand upon the cold lunar dust and returned the signal with a single, slow blink of her helmet light. No words, no promises, just an acknowledgement. "We see you." When the contact ended, the moon returned to silence, but the crew did not sleep that night. They had crossed an invisible threshold. Data was sent back to Earth, encrypted and uncertain. Politicians debated exposure, scientists begged for discretion, and the public remained in darkness. For the lunar beings, it was not a first contact at all. It was a first test to see whether humanity still remembered how to listen. The moment Vega's faint encounter logs reached mission control, a storm began, not in space, but across conference rooms and encrypted channels on Earth. Analysts replayed the footage, the shimmering silhouette, the synchronized light pulse. It was undeniable, yet also unbelievable. Officials debated, should this truth belong to the world or to those who found it first? In hushed tones, the word containment was spoken far more than revelation. The United States, having funded and led the mission, claimed jurisdiction over the information. Private meetings with allied nations followed, each one wrapped in the veil of security. They feared mass hysteria, the crumbling of established narratives, the questions that would inevitably follow. What do they want? Why now? And if they've always been there, who else knows? Meanwhile, agencies quietly shifted resources, building a wall of secrecy taller than any lunar ridge. The scientists on the mission, the ones who dreamed of open discovery, were the first casualties of the cover-up. Their requests to publish findings were denied. Their personal notes were classified. Some resigned in protest, others complied under pressure. Vega herself was ordered into silence, her heroic first step reframed as an unexplained reflection event. For the world, the moon remained barren, but for those behind closed doors, it had never been more alive. Secrecy, like gravity, pulls things apart. Nations that were excluded from the knowledge began to suspect. Leaks trickled, blurry images, cryptic testimonies, accidental signals caught by amateur radio astronomers. Conspiracy channels ignited, mixing truth with fiction until no one could tell the difference. The beings on the moon, watching quietly, saw this chaos unfold like cracks in a frozen lake. They did not interfere. Their history had taught them that Earth's noise could bury its own truths. By the end of that first year, a silent pact had formed. The existence of lunar beings was officially unconfirmed. Future missions were redirected, landing far from the craters where contact had occurred. Only a select few, a council of advisors, military strategists, and shadow scientists, held the full picture. They did not yet know the beings' intentions, but they agreed on one thing: control the narrative, or risk losing control entirely. Within that silence, one question lingered like dust in the air. Were the beings dangerous, or were we? Every signal from the moon was now analyzed not just for its meaning, but for its potential threat. And in that cautious analysis, the most human of mistakes was made, assuming silence equals safety.